Welcome back to Behind the Yellow Tape, where today we're going to be looking at the mysterious disappearance of Laci Peterson. Laci Peterson, a 27-year-old woman, was 8 months pregnant with her first child when she disappeared from her home in Modesto, California, on December the 24th, 2002. Laci and her husband, Scott Peterson, had been married for 5 years, and it was Scott who reported her missing to the police that same day, stating that he had last seen her earlier that morning when he left for a fishing trip at the Berkeley Marina. He claimed that when he returned home, Laci was not there and their dog was found wandering in the neighbourhood with its leash still on. The case immediately gained widespread media attention and a massive search effort was launched to find Laci. Volunteers, law enforcement agencies and news organisations all contributed to the search. Laci's family and friends, including Scott, were highly active in the search efforts and appeared frequently in the media, pleading for her safe return. As the investigation continued, the police began looking closely at Scott Peterson's behaviour and statements. Suspicion grew when it was revealed that he'd not been honest about several aspects of his life. One of the most significant revelations was that Scott had been having an extramarital affair with a woman named Amber Frey. Scott and Amber started their relationship in November 2002, just a month before Laci went missing. Scott had told Amber that he was a widower, and she was unaware of his marriage to Laci. After Amber Frey learned about Scott Peterson's deception and the fact that he was a suspect in his wife's disappearance, she immediately contacted the police to share her knowledge. She voluntarily provided information about her relationship with Scott, the conversations they'd had, and the fact that he'd lied to her about his marital status. Amber Frey cooperated with the police and agreed to record phone conversations with Scott, which were later used as evidence during the trial. In the recorded conversations, Scott had been heard making deceptive statements about his marriage and his whereabouts. He continued to mislead Amber, claiming that he was in Europe and that he'd lost his wife, implying that she was already deceased, when in reality he was still in the US and Laci was missing. Some of the recorded conversations reveal Scott Peterson's apparent emotional detachment from the situation. He didn't express a level of concern and grief that might be expected from a husband whose pregnant wife had gone missing. Scott Peterson made statements that could be interpreted as incriminating. For example, he told Amber Frey that he was trying to figure out how to explain this to the world and that his life was missing someone. The recordings also highlighted contradictions between Scott's statements to Amber and the information he provided to law enforcement and the media. These inconsistencies added to the suspicions surrounding his involvement in Laci's disappearance. The prosecution argued that Scott Peterson had a motive to murder his wife because he wanted to be free of his marriage and the impending responsibilities of fatherhood. They alleged that he had murdered Laci and their unborn son to pursue a relationship with Amber Frey. On the other hand, some friends and family members of Laci and Scott described their relationship as seemingly happy and loving. They asserted that they saw no outward signs of marital problems. In April 2003, the remains of Laci Peterson and her unborn son were discovered on the shores of San Francisco Bay, not far from where Scott Peterson had claimed to have gone fishing on the day of her disappearance. Autopsies revealed that Laci had been strangled and that her unborn son had died as a result of her murder. Scott Peterson was arrested shortly after the discovery of the bodies and was charged with the murders of his wife and unborn son. His trial began in 2004 and was heavily covered by the media. Scott Peterson's defence team argued that he was wrongly accused and that he had nothing to do with the deaths of Laci and Connor. The defence presented an alternative theory of the crime, suggesting that Laci had been abducted and murdered by an unknown assailant while Scott was away on a fishing trip. However, during the trial, the prosecution argued that Scott Peterson had killed Laci at their home in Modesto, California, and then transported her body to the San Francisco Bay, where her remains were eventually discovered. They presented circumstantial evidence to support this theory, including the fact that Scott had claimed to have gone fishing at the Berkeley Marina on the day of Laci's disappearance, which is not far from where her body was found. The prosecution also presented evidence related to the boat that Scott used for fishing, and suggested that he'd used it to transport Laci's body to the bay. Some people speculated that Scott might have also intentionally let their family dog out to make Laci's disappearance appear as though she'd gone for a walk with the dog and disappeared. On November 12, 2004, Scott Peterson was found guilty of first-degree murder for the death of Laci Peterson and second-degree murder for the death of their unborn son, Connor. He was sentenced to death and remains on death row in California. One of the most disturbing aspects of this case is how Scott Peterson himself did not speak about his unborn son in public statements or interviews. showing his total disregard for his baby son. Much of the discussion surrounding Connor's death came from the legal proceedings and expert witnesses during the trial. The case received significant public attention and remains a topic of discussion and debate due to its high-profile nature and the questions surrounding Scott Peterson's guilt or innocence. Thanks for joining us today on this episode of Behind the Yellow Tape, and don't forget to like and subscribe.